The readings from John's Gospel, chapter 11, verses 17 to 27. Jesus comforts the sisters. And it's page 1078. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. "Lord," Martha said to Jesus, "if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha answered, "I know he will rise again on the resurrection at the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live, even though he dies. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" "Yes, Lord," she told him. "I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who has come into the world." This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Good morning. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, this morning we come to you with our arms and hearts open wide. Please speak to us through your Spirit so we can grow ever closer to you and be ever more effective in your service. In Jesus' mighty name. Amen. Okay, so we're looking at John 11 verses 17 to 27, but we'll be looking probably at the whole of chapter 11. So if you want to get it in the Bible or get it on your phone or whatever, I will be referring to it a little bit. And I think it's fair to say that this morning that we're looking at a story and a subject of incredible pain this morning, and also incredible hope. The story of death and resurrection. And this may be tough for some people. Some of the stuff in here may be tough for some people to hear. You may be going through it. It may remind you of people that have died, and so on. So please look after yourselves this morning. If you need to leave, then go out and talk to someone. But we can't talk about resurrection without first talking about death. And a lot of important points in this passage lie within, firstly, what Jesus did, and then secondly, what Jesus said. What Jesus did. A lot of the power in this passage lies within what he did before he made the I am statement. I don't know about you, but I love a story of unlikely victory, of something that's been turned around. So when I was a child, I used to love films, I still do love films, where an unlikely triumph occurs. So one of my favourite film collections is Rocky. And the slogan for Rocky is, "His whole life was a 1,000,000-to-1 shot," which gives you a picture in what happened. But whether it is Rocky or the Mighty Ducks or whatever it is, it's people overcoming in unlikely scenarios. And this is a bit of a glimpse of that, particularly for Lazarus. Let's have a look at what went before this. Jesus' words have been creating heightened tensions in the area. He'd been more bold in his approach in telling people who he was and where he came from. And people were getting upset about that. The Sadducees and the Pharisees and their other respective gangs were getting upset about what Jesus was saying. They wanted to stone him for his blasphemy, but he kept getting away. So he took himself over the river a bit akin to, if you are a film fan, sitting in the Winchester and waiting for it all to blow up. He was doing that and just waiting, and he's carrying place elsewhere. And then Mary and Martha send word to Jesus. They send word to Jesus that their brother Lazarus is sick. And I don't know about you, but if you were to send word or a letter, or sometimes, obviously in prayer, to Jesus about a situation, about someone that is sick, sometimes I go above and beyond. If I was in this situation, I'd be like, can you do this because you need this, and he needs to do this, and he's going to... Mary and Martha send word to Jesus with 7 words. And the 7 words are this. Simply, this is their message. Lord, the one you love is sick. So they don't send word to Jesus saying, our brother who we love, and it's not all about them. They're saying, the one you love is sick. And that's it, because that encapsulates everything they want to say. Because Jesus first loved us. And Jesus gets this message and he says, this won't end in death. Because he said the Son of God will be glorified through it. And in verse 5 it tells us here, if we read verse 5, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. Jesus loved them. What a statement. And it's amazing to think that it's written there, Jesus loved Mary, Martha and Lazarus. But it's also written here that Jesus loves you. So they sent a message to him. It says here that Jesus loved them. But when Jesus gets the message, what does he do? Yet, when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. So there's no urgency from Jesus here. He's not like, I best get back because I can sort this out. It says in the verse before that he loved them, but he stayed where he was for 2 more days. And then he said to his disciples, let us go back. And then Jesus comes, and Lazarus has been dead in the tomb for 4 days. So this is not a mistake, he is properly dead. Fully dead. We could go through the Monty Python parrot sketch, but you get it. He is deceased, he is no more. And then Martha says, if you were here, he wouldn't have died. That was a great declaration of faith. She said, if you were here, he wouldn't have died. Not any questions about his will. She said, if you were here, he wouldn't have died. She says, and I know now that whatever you ask for, it will be given to you. That is tremendous faith right there, in the middle of her pain and suffering. But as we look at this exchange, I think it resonates with us because it can be the same in our lives. We all experience sorrow, loss, death, sickness, pain, mourning. We all experience that in our life. And not necessarily just of the people that we love or the knowledge that will come to us all, but also of our dreams, our aspirations, things that we wanted to do, hopes that we have that will go unfulfilled. And we call out to God in desperation because we know if God shows up, he can turn this around. And sometimes it feels like there's no reply. It feels like God is staying where he is for a couple more days. And then God may show up in another area of our life. Something else may happen where we can't deny the blessing of God. And then we point to the situation that's causing us pain and say, Lord, if you were here, this wouldn't have happened. But then we can learn from Martha, where she says, but I know now that whatever you ask for can be given to you. I still believe. Because Martha knew that Lazarus would rise again. She declares it. I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. And Jesus says to her after this, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die. And whoever lives believing in me will never die. And he says to her, do you believe this? And as we mourn, we grieve, we come to terms with loss, death, and often our own mortality. Jesus asks again the same of us. Do you believe this? Do you believe that this is not it? That this is not the end? And then let's look what happens next. It tells us that Jesus was deeply moved in his spirit. And it goes on to say those famous words, Jesus wept. But why did Jesus weep? He knows what's going to happen. He knows it's going to be all right in the end. Jesus wept because he cared deeply, because he loved Mary, Martha, and their brother Lazarus. It's told us that. So Jesus is weeping because he knows that they're in pain. He knows that they are suffering. Even though he knows the outcome, he knows that in that moment they are suffering. So he sits in that pain with them. Jesus knows that there is no resurrection without death. So for those of us here this morning that are stuck in pain, the message is hope. Because death wreaks havoc in our world. At times it breaks us and breaks our hearts. When we lose people we love, it can be very destructive. And we have a hope in resurrection and life beyond this place. But it doesn't stop the pain that we feel in that moment. And this is reassuring because it suggests that it breaks God's heart too. Because even though he sees the victory, he sits in the pain. And Jesus calls Lazarus out of the tomb. And Lazarus wanders out, all back to life and everything. But that wasn't the end of the pain, because Lazarus' life had been restored, but life would continue for him. There would be ups and downs, there would be pain within that. Lazarus would die again. His sisters would die. They were still human, they still had to go through life. But now to what Jesus said. He said, I am the resurrection and the life. Not I am a way to resurrection, I am a kind of resurrection, I am good at resurrection. He says, I am the resurrection. And we can't read this passage without being immediately drawn to Jesus' death and resurrection. There's a parallel in there. Lazarus has been resurrected. He has been brought back to life. And as we approach Easter in this time of Lent, allow me to say this, that I don't think that Jesus was brought back to life. And before you throw stones at me and cast me out as a heretic, please listen to what I'm saying. Lazarus died and Jesus put life back into his body. He restored it. But I believe that when Jesus died, he felt the full effects of death. He went right through it and into the other side in a new life. It wasn't a restoration of his old life, it was a new life. It was a resurrection that created something new. Which is why he could appear in locked rooms. Which is why he could walk through walls. Yet he still ate fish. If you want to live the resurrection life, get some omega-3. But Jesus went through death and came out the other side. Because when Jesus said, I am the resurrection, he didn't simply mean that he had the power to cancel out death. He meant that he would go and completely and unequivocally triumph over death and do away with every single effect of it. It tells us that in Revelation 21. And it says, "And I will wipe away every tear from their eye." There will be no more pain. There will be no more suffering. There will be no more injustice. It will all be gone. Everything will be made new. There will be a new heaven and a new earth. That's because Jesus is the resurrection. Because he didn't just go and come back 3 days later, well, the effects are gone and cancelled out. He smashed death to pieces. And because Jesus did this, we all have the promise of that same resurrection life. That through Jesus we will go through that and we will come out new. We will be new creation. We don't want to be restored like this. And it's not just because, as I said, Jesus simply had the power to reverse death. Because he's obliterated it. Because its effects will be over. Because he is our resurrection. And in this world, we may weep like Mary and Martha. And Jesus will feel that with us, every single ounce of pain. Yet because of his sacrifice, we know that this isn't the end of the story. And in conclusion, I guess the question is, so what? But we all experience death and resurrection in life. We're going through loss and pain and heartache. But be assured that resurrection wins. We may feel like God isn't listening, that it's been a period of 2 days. But he is. He weeps. And it may be bad and painful at times in life, even for a long time. But at the end, when all is said and done, every tear shall be wiped away. And that's because Jesus is the resurrection and the life.